during our first day of class, he actually said, okay, we're going to fully immerse ourselves into, the English speaking environment. And it would really help if we all had English names that we could address each other as. But after a while, it started to, I guess I just got used to it and it grew on me. But, it always just felt a little bit like I was kind of living in someone else's shoes just during those couple hours that I was, in that environment. And also, it's very difficult to remember the names of my other friends who, also had to take on English names.
Yerin Yoon was born in Seoul, South Korea, but has lived abroad most of her life. At 7 years old, she moved to Massachusetts with her family where she started kindergarten. In second grade, she moved to Thailand where she completed primary school. Yerin returned to the US to obtain her bachelor's in international studies and a master's in public administration. She now works as a market analyst at a B2B agriculture platform called Tridge, based in her home of South Korea. Yerin is able to use her international background and multicultural exposure to cross-communicate with both fellow Tridgers and clients across 45 plus countries. Today's discussion involves Yerin sharing her story about being randomly assigned an English name, aged just 5, and reclaiming her Korean name a few years later. Names are enriched with meaning, a part of one's identity, and hold such importance. Welcome to That's My Name. I'm Maya Mitsko September Welford. What's your name?
My name is Yerin Yoon. In Korean, it's pronounced Yerin.
Oh, thank you for sharing, Yerin. And I'm really, really excited to have you on as a guest today. I know
Thank
that
you.
I know that you've not always been known as Yerin. Can
Mm-hmm.
you tell me about the English name that you used to use?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Korea. I was born in Seoul. When I turned 5, my parents actually started sending me to an English academy
Mm-hmm.
here in Korea, and it's quite interesting how I got my English name because I, along with my friends, we were in this academy setting. We had this teacher, and during our first day of class, he actually said, okay, we're going to fully immerse ourselves into, the English speaking environment. And it would really help if we all had English names that we could address each other as. So he split the girls and boys up, and then he wrote some random, very common or easily pronounceable English names, put them into a little hat, and then had us draw these names out. And so
Wow.
I remember I drew out a piece of paper, and the name written on it was Claire. And so,
Wow.
from the first day that I started this academy, I started being addressed as Claire, and it was almost officially, yeah, I guess, my English name.
Wow. Wow. Um, Obviously, I've read that story, and that's how I
Hmm.
kind of came across you. And I
Hmm.
know that we when we were speaking before this, you told me that story, and
Hmm.
it's just so fascinating to me.
Hmm.
So did you actually? So were you the one who actually went over to the kind of hat or the box, and you picked that name out? Was it, or did he kind of just say, "Okay, Yerin, it's your turn, and let's pick this out"?
Um, from what I remember, yeah, we just kind of stood in a line and then all took
Mhm.
turns drawing the name out of the hat. And
Wow.
I'm pretty sure that one of my friends' name was like Susan and the other was Lucy. And like two of
Wow.
my friends were just kind of looking at their names and saying like, "Oh, wait, I kind of wanted yours." And it was like very interesting that, a name which is supposed to kind of represent your identity, although we were really young, but still just like kind of tossing that back and forth and being like, oh, I kind of want your name rather than the one that I got.
Yeah.
It seemed like a very lighthearted thing, but little did I know that name would kind of stick with me for a couple years down the line.
Yeah. Wow. And like, how did it, do you remember how, because I know you were very young, you were 5 when you started at this English
Hmm.
academy. Do you
Hmm.
remember kind of how it felt when you were being addressed as Claire? Like, how did that feel?
Hmm. I would say, from what I can remember, it was very strange for sure because at the time I didn't even speak very good English, obviously, and
Yeah.
so every time I went to this academy, and it was I think 3 to 4 times a week,
Mhm.
and I was just addressed by this name. It felt obviously very foreign. There were times when my teacher would say Claire, and I wouldn't look up because
Mm,
obviously it's not the name that I associate myself with. But after a while, it started to, I guess I just got used to it and it grew on me. But, it always just felt a little bit like I was kind of living in someone else's shoes just during those
mm,
couple hours that I was, in that environment. And also, it's very difficult to remember the names of my other friends who,
yeah.
also had to take on English names. So it took a while for sure just to get the hang of, addressing myself with this English name and doing the same for my friends. I think at the time we were also, because we were trying to, learn English as quickly as possible, instead of just using the pronoun I, we would also say our name actually. So, like
Wow.
Claire went to the supermarket or Claire loves to shop. And so it was like a double standard of
Mm,
isolating myself in these different narratives. So it was very interesting to say the least.
hmm. And it's the point you just made around, you felt kind of isolated from yourself.
Hmm.
I think
Hmm.
that really kind of reinforces that names are such a strong part of our
Hmm.
identity.
Yeah.
And the fact that you had to use this name that was just very much randomly
Hmm.
assigned to you. It wasn't, there was kind of no thought or meaning behind
Right.
like the name itself. It was like, you need an English name, and here's like a
Exactly.
random one that I'm going to give you. So
Hmm.
it's, yeah. So a question I was going to ask you was like, did your
Hmm.
friends also call you Claire? And I know that you just said that you had to learn kind of your friends' names. And did you
Hmm.
know these friends from outside the English Academy? So did you also know their kind of their real names?
Hmm. Yeah, so all of these friends that I went to academy with were also the same kids that I was going to preschool with as well.
Hmm.
So we were all just kind of in the same school environment, and then after school we would head on over to the academy right away. And so
Mm,
it was weird because while we're in school we would all be speaking Korean, addressing each other
mm,
with our Korean names, and then suddenly we go to this academy and then we all start speaking our very broken English and call each other by our English names. Sometimes we would address our Korean names, and then our teacher would say, "Oh, no, no, in the classroom, it's Claire." And
wow.
so, again, I think it just took a long time to get used to. And kind of like you mentioned, there isn't really a significance or meaning behind the name. And I think that's one of the other reasons why it was hard for us to get used to
Mm,
addressing each other in that way. But yeah, they are my lifelong friends actually. Even now, I keep in touch with some of, my preschool friends. And from time to time, we do, as a joke, call each other by our like English names. So it's funny.
yeah. And with kind of the friends that you've remained, those that you remained friends with, did
Hmm.
they switch back to using their kind of actual names, or have some of them kind of continued to use those English names that were assigned to them?
So actually, all of the friends from like preschool, they all ended up staying in Korea and
Okay.
living, here just their whole life. Whereas I actually ended up kind of, going global, and so I lived in the States and then and then Thailand
Okay.
for the majority of my life. And so all of my other friends, they switched back to their Korean names permanently. And I think that actually, and I'll go more into detail later, but it was one of the reasons why I also didn't want to stick with the name Claire when I started
Mm,
living abroad, because I knew that like I had this Korean name and it meant a lot to me. And so yeah, I actually also ended up using my Korean name when I lived abroad.
hmm. And let's touch on that some more. So I know that you did move abroad at quite a young age.
Hmm.
So did the name Claire, after you left kind of your English academy, did the
Hmm.
name Claire stay there and just stayed at the English academy, or did you take it with you when you moved abroad?
Yeah, so when I was 7, my family and I actually moved to Boston, Massachusetts.
Hmm.
And I started going to just a regular public school, started kindergarten. And during that first year in the States, I went by the name Claire, actually. And
Okay.
so, people addressed me as Claire in the classroom setting. And then after my first year, I thought, like this really isn't my name. And I wasn't
Mm.
really quite sure why I had to continue using it. And so this part I don't remember quite well, but my parents actually told me that I asked them if I could just go back to using the name Yerin.
Hmm.
And they hadn't put too much thought into it either. I think they just decided to sign me up for the school with my nickname Claire so that it's
Mm.
easier for the teachers and other students to pronounce. But they said, if you want to use your original name, I guess why not. And
Yeah.
then so that's how like the English version or the English pronunciation of the name Yerin came about. And
Hmm.
luckily enough, I think my name is actually quite easy to spell. So it's Yerin, just Yerin.
Yeah.
And I started going by Yerin starting in first grade, actually.
Okay. Okay. And do you remember
Mhm.
how it felt kind of switching from being known as Claire when you'd moved
Mhm.
to Boston,
Mhm.
um, to then being addressed as the name that you wanted to be addressed as, and the name that obviously has so much meaning to you because it was the name
Mhm.
that your parents gave to you. Do you remember how that kind of switch felt?
Yeah, so it was actually the start of this, very common struggle that I think a lot of like foreigners in the
Mm.
States or abroad experience of having your name mispronounced. So
Hmm.
when Yerin started being written on paper, like during the first week of roll call during first grade, my name was butchered quite a lot, and it
Wow.
was
Okay.
surprising because in my head I thought, oh, Yerin is it's just 5 letters,
Yeah.
quite easy to spell.
Yeah.
But you'd be surprised how many people would first look at the spelling on the page and then ask me how to pronounce the name, or very
Okay.
inconfidently be like urine or
Mm.
yirin. It was, yeah, just a lot of different versions of pronunciations
Hmm.
going on. And then I would always just tell my teachers or other students and my friends, it's Yerin. And when I got older, I found out it's a little bit easier if I just tell them, you know, it's easy to pronounce my name if you think of it as Aaron with a Y in
Mm.
front, and then that makes
Hmm.
it Yaren. And
Hmm.
then people would be like, oh, that makes sense. Like, oh, what a nice name. And so, yeah, I think the transition was a slight struggle in that I constantly had to, tell people how to pronounce my name. And also, because my last name is Yoon, my
Mm.
initials being YY, I am always at the end of like any roll
Oh,
call sheet and stuff, like
yeah.
very, very last. And then so I don't know why, but then I also always felt this and um not anticipation, like
Mm.
anxiety, like all the
Mm.
other names
Hmm.
would be so seamlessly like read through,
Mm.
and then
Yeah.
my name always at the end, the teacher or
Mm.
someone would struggle with it. And then it's
Yeah.
just like a very awkward ending to a roll call. So nothing that like stuck as like a very uncomfortable memory or anything, but it was just, again, interesting that such dynamic was always present.
Mm-hmm. It's yeah, I can definitely resonate with the point about the kind of register and being called in class. So
Hmm.
my surname's Welford. So
Hmm.
when it's by alphabetical order, W
Hmm.
is obviously very close to the end. And
Hmm.
similar for me, my name can also be mispronounced sometimes. So I
Hmm.
definitely resonate with that kind of anticipation
Yeah.
of like, oh no, is my name going to be pronounced incorrectly?
Right.
And also,
Exactly.
Yeah, it's also interesting how, when you said to people, "Oh, it's like Erin, but with a Y on the Y on at
Mm-hmm.
the beginning," and then people
Mm-hmm.
kind of it made sense to people. I think
Right.
what's interesting about that is that Erin is like a Western name. It's typically an Irish name,
Mm-hmm. Oh,
and
okay.
yeah, it's typically an Irish name. So it's quite interesting how because you were kind of linking your name with something
Mm-hmm.
that's like Western and like potentially familiar, that
Right.
then it made sense to people. And again, I think it comes back to this point around like making people feel comfortable. And I know
Yeah.
that you mentioned that your parents just kind of put Claire down when you were
Mm-hmm.
Claire down as the name because it would be
Mm-hmm.
easier for others to pronounce. And I
Right.
think it definitely kind of says something around feeling like people have to conform and
Mm-hmm.
like make things comfortable for like Western people or
Right.
yeah. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's very, very interesting. I definitely picked up on that point when you
Yeah, I
spoke
mean, I
about the name
think
Erin.
that like just like you said, it's kind of this need to assimilate,
Mm,
especially since, in a lot of ways we are the outsider if we're moving to, America or Europe. So
mm,
a lot of my friends, the majority of them, especially those I've went to school with in university, my Korean friends all have nicknames. And what I find interesting is that nowadays, especially, they don't just come up with like random English nicknames, but
mm,
they actually try to find one that is, one easy to pronounce, is
mm,
common, but also sounds a little bit similar to their Korean name.
yeah.
So I have a friend whose Korean name is Sunho,
Hmm.
and his English nickname is Sunny. And
Okay.
so I think there it's cool to see that there's this, deliberate effort to make their
Yeah.
nickname somehow relevant to their Korean name, even if it's only on the level of, like the pronunciation aspect.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
I think it shows this, like, I don't want to get too philosophical, but this
Mm.
like deeper need to still, maintain their identity when it
Yeah.
comes to their
Yeah.
name,
Yeah.
and making sure that they don't steer too far away from who they really are.
And I think that's important, and it makes complete sense. If
Hmm.
someone is choosing to use a different name, it makes
Hmm.
complete sense that they would want to find one that is linked to their existing name because they've tied so much meaning and so much of their identity to that. So yeah, it makes sense to me. And I know that you've lived in quite a few different countries.
Hmm.
Has there been like a particular country where you've been more kind of aware of your name? So you've had more
Hmm.
questions around your name or more discussions around it, or you've experienced more mispronunciations of it?
Hmm. Oh yeah. So earlier I'd meant to say that, yeah, when I was 7, I lived in Boston for a little bit, and
Yeah.
then when I turned 9, my family and I, again, we moved, and then we ended up being in Thailand for
Okay.
13 years. So, the rest of elementary school, middle school, high school, I spent in Thailand, and I actually went to an international school. And, it was a very English curriculum based um, setting. So
Hmm.
I actually had friends from all over the world, which was really cool. I had Polish friends, Indian friends, friends from Canada, France, and then all across Asia as well.
Mm.
So when I was in Thailand, I think there was slightly less of the struggle to have my name pronounced correctly, because
Mm.
I had Korean friends who, obviously got my name right off the bat.
Yeah.
So a lot of our teachers, though, they were from, either the US or from Europe or from, South America, Canada. And so again, when it came to first learn learning to address my name in a classroom setting, they did struggle a bit, but I think it felt a little bit less. I felt a lot less singled out for sure than when I was in the
Mm.
States, because our classroom, environment was filled with so many students from so many different
Yeah.
backgrounds and cultures. So there was a lot of that, struggle to pronounce names correctly for a lot of people. And
Mm-hmm.
so, it was like a collective feeling that we had. So I think when I was in the States, I felt a little bit more of that mispronunciation being a very prominent thing.
Mm.
Um, so after I graduated high school in Thailand, I actually ended up doing university and my master's back in the States as well. So,
Okay.
yeah, when I returned to the States, being, a fully fledged young adult, I was I went back to that feeling of, oh yeah, people do mispronounce my name at times. And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, I guess in college during, the first couple weeks of class, my professors would again ask me how my name was pronounced and ask if they were saying it right. But at that time, I think I was a little bit more used to it and kind of expected it more.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think what that really shows is the importance of diversity, because
Hmm.
from what I'm hearing is when you were in Thailand,
Hmm.
you experienced kind of being around people from loads of different countries. You just listed out so
Right.
many different countries, and I think that really shows the importance of
Hmm.
diversity and making people feel more included and more like
Hmm.
they belong, because it's
Yeah.
a sense of kind of, while everyone is different, there's also kind of a shared understanding of, being different as
Hmm.
well. And yeah, I think that really shows the importance of having diverse environments.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
And have you ever considered using Claire again? So since you stopped using the name Claire, or
Mhm.
have you ever considered using it again, or another name again?
No, actually, I haven't.
Hmm.
I try to take a lot of pride in the name that was given to me. And
Hmm.
I think as I grow older, and I'm always kind of, in search of like my deeper identity.
Yeah.
I recently asked my parents, like how I got my original name. So Korean names are actually
Mm-hmm.
based off of Chinese characters.
Okay.
And mine was given to me not by my parents, but actually my grandpa on my dad's side.
Oh,
And
nice.
so my the not including my first name Yoon,
Mm.
Yerin actually is comprised of two Chinese characters. The Ye part, the character symbolizes wisdom and intelligence, according
Mm-hmm.
to my dad. And then the Rin part, which is Din, it
Mm-hmm.
means jade, or the spiritual meaning apparently means like wisdom gathered in tranquility. So it seems
Mm.
like my name has this theme going on of like intelligence or wisdom. And I just found that really cool, that there's
Mm-hmm.
an even deeper layer of meaning to the name that was given to me. And so, because it holds something really special to my heart, I don't think I would ever go with another name. But
Mm.
I will say, because I've lived in the States for a long time and kind of abroad, and if I were to ever have my own kids, which I want to,
Yeah.
I would see myself, with my family living outside of Korea again. And so
Mm-hmm.
that means that, potentially there might be a need for, my kids to maybe take on a nickname. And
Mm-hmm.
so I thought, well, I don't have a nickname, so I don't necessarily think I'd want my kids to have a nickname, but maybe I'd want them to have a Korean name that's easy to pronounce in English. That
Mm-hmm.
kind of thought
Mm-hmm.
naturally occurred to me. And while I was having that thought, it made me realize, oh, I'm already so accustomed to this idea that
Mm.
names have to be assimilated to the
Yeah.
Western culture. And so,
Yeah.
again, it speaks to what we were talking about earlier, that if we see ourselves in like a Western or an American environment, we kind of think, okay, how can we make our name a little bit easier, a little bit more
Mm.
culturally, you know, it, I guess accepted may not be the right word, but just easier to approach from, someone else's standpoint. So,
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's this notion of like you have to have a name that is makes it easy for others and comfortable for
Hmm.
others. But then it's like, but why do we have to feel like we need to make it
Exactly.
easy for someone else? Like it's
Yeah.
your name. If you want to
Hmm.
name your child a name that has a beautiful meaning and
Hmm.
because you like that name, that
Hmm.
should be it. It shouldn't, well,
Exactly.
in my view, it shouldn't be, oh, we want to make it easy for other
Hmm.
people because it's not their name. It's,
Yeah.
and also it's like, well, if people can pronounce like Beethoven or
Hmm.
like Galileo,
Right.
you can pronounce any name. Like you just practice it and you can pronounce it.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's an interesting one for
No,
sure.
yeah, for sure.
And I really love the kind of meaning behind your name. It's such a beautiful meaning, and I
Uh,
love that. Yeah, it's a kind of gift from your. Did you say your grandfather?
yeah, my
Yeah,
grandpa. Yeah,
yeah.
thank
So
you.
it's really really beautiful. What advice would you give to others who are kind of thinking about using an English name?
I would say, I mean, I also don't think that having, a nickname is, if you want one, that
Hmm.
is totally fine. But
Yeah.
I think that a lot of people, just from my personal experience and, my friends around me who are Asian or from other countries, they seem to definitely take on, a nickname just for the ease and convenience of others.
Hmm.
But I would suggest that, if that's the sole reason, then just maybe to reflect one more time on how important it is for you to, acknowledge your true name and the special meaning that is probably embedded in it. Any parent, I'm sure, took a lot of time and thought into crafting a beautiful name for their children. And
Hmm.
so I think it's really important to remember that. And if it takes a couple extra seconds for a professor, a teacher, or a fellow friend who's from a different country to learn your name, that's totally fine. I think that people should be, open and culturally embracive, not
Hmm.
just to people's, identity or cultural heritage, but to the name that's linked with it, right? So,
Hmm. Yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
that's, I think, what I would say.
Thanks for sharing that.
Hmm.
And I picked up earlier when you was speaking about your name and
Hmm.
you kind of mentioned that in Korean it's pronounced Yerin.
Hmm.
Um, is there and but whereas like in I guess the English language or like British English or American English,
Hmm.
people would pronounce it Yerin, and I'm guessing you introduce yourself as Yerin.
Hmm.
Um, have you ever considered kind of using the more Korean pronunciation of your name?
Mm. I actually haven't. I think I
Hmm.
tend to appreciate the fact that like people can say Yaren with ease in
Mm,
itself. Um, but yeah, there's like a different ring to it when people say
mm,
Yeren versus Yaren, and y- I I have a colleague, a coworker who is from Austria, and he actually says Yeren, and it's
okay.
really cool how he says it almost with that like staccato tone that
Mm,
is very similar to how it's kind of pronounced in Korean. But other than that, if people just call me Yeren, that's totally fine as well.
mm,
I've never really thought further into it, I think.
hmm, hmm. Yeah, the reason I kind of thought about that is my mum is Japanese and her
Mm-hmm.
name in kind of British English is
Mm-hmm.
Harumi,
Oh,
but
okay.
in Japanese it's Harumi. And
Ah, right.
I've kind of obviously grown up with her being mum, but when she
Mm-hmm.
introduces herself, it's hi, I'm Harumi. But we were
Mm-hmm.
having a conversation the other day and she was like, my name's actually pronounced Harumi.
Mm-hmm.
And it's she was speaking about how it is kind of a weird, this is like Harumi is like her British
Mm-hmm.
side and like it's
Right.
her British kind of persona and identity, whereas that kind of identity associated with like Harumi is
Mm-hmm.
kind of in Japan or like when she's speaking with like her Japanese friends or her
Right.
family. um so yeah, it is interesting while it's like still Yerin and Yerin,
Mm-hmm.
like they're
Mm,
still, it's still your name.
right.
They're kind of perhaps associated with, like, maybe Yerin is more associated with like Korea and like speaking with
Mm-hmm.
your family, whereas
Yeah,
Yerin
for
might be more
sure.
like workplace associated or kind of education associated.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to explain, but I do sense like a slight difference when people call me Yerin. It sounds slightly more informal, very casual and like friendly,
Mm,
but in like a Western sense. Whereas when
mm-hmm,
people say Yerina, then it sounds, it's how my parents address me most.
mm,
And they're the ones who obviously pronounce my name that way the
mm-hmm.
most as well. So then it sounds just a little bit more private, I guess,
Yeah,
just because
yeah,
it's
yeah.
like in the family household. Um,
Mm,
so yeah, I sense a slight difference for sure in the way,
mm,
the intonation of which my name is addressed.
mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that.
No
So,
problem.
what are you up to now?
So I'm actually back in South Korea. I finished my master's in Philadelphia back in 2020. And ever
Mm,
since, kind of due to COVID, I ended up
mm,
coming back to Korea. And then right now, I'm working at a company called Tridge, where we're a startup based in Seoul and a B2B agriculture intelligence service. We
nice.
do in house sourcing and trading of all types of agriculture goods and vegetables, produce, grains, wheat.
Wow.
We're a very fast growing company, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm working as a market analyst right now. And I actually really love my job and just the
Good.
working environment because out of the 500 plus employees, um, more than 300 of them are actually abroad. So we have a lot of
Wow.
remote Tridgers all across the world, in Asia, North and South America, Europe, and Africa. And
Mm-hmm.
so, almost on a daily basis, I get to speak to colleagues from so many different countries,
Mm.
all with really fascinating, cool, awesome names.
Mm.
And I actually really enjoy when I meet, new Tridgers and they have like really cool names. If it's slightly difficult to pronounce, it's actually a great conversation starter to,
Mm, definitely.
really familiarize my name with um, myself with their names and how to pronounce it. And yeah, so I think that kind of the multicultural background I had, just living abroad in the
Mm.
US and in Southeast Asia, just really ties in well with the working environment I'm in now, where, yeah, I get to just communicate with people from so many different time zones.
Mm, no, that's amazing, and I love to hear that you enjoy your work and enjoy your job. I'm yeah, really great to hear. And
Thank you.
how can people connect with you?
So I'm reachable mostly by LinkedIn. I also have an Instagram, although the account is private. If anyone gives me a follow, I'd happily accept. So yeah, LinkedIn and Instagram are the best ways to reach me.
Brilliant. And I will tag them and mention them in the description when this podcast is live on any or most podcast platforms. Thank you
Great.
so much, Yaren, for your
Hmm.
time today. I've really loved hearing about your story.
Hmm. Thank you so much for having me. It was so great to meet you.